The Queen of Camp, who had a rather unfortunate start and maybe even end to 2024. Welcome to Six Notes of Separation. If you're new to the podcast, here's how it's going to work. Every episode, I dive into an artist exploring their careers, their music, and any headlines they might have found themselves wrapped up in. But to spice things up a little bit, I've put my own twist on things. Every episode I do has to be linked to the previous and succeeding artist in some way. This could be through a producer in common, artists that they've both collaborated with, or even perhaps through subliminal lyric references. Anything goes as long as there's a link. So, without further ado, I am going to get stuck into the pop star that has really defined the sound of the 20-teens in pop music. The human who went from smash hit #1 singles to barely charting at all. Katy Perry. Now, for my YouTube watchers, just a little disclaimer, I am wearing sunglasses. I am wearing sunglasses, not because I'm a diva, not because I think I'm Emma Chamberlain, but purely for the reason that I have no makeup on. And maybe I'm just a little insecure to put my barren face on the internet. You know, I've hopped straight out of the shower. I couldn't be asked. So that's what's going on here. On to the actual podcast. Before I get too carried away with talking all about Katy Perry's life, it's time for me to reveal the link between this episode and last episode's Olivia Rodrigo. After Sour came out, Olivia's culture-shaking smash hit debut album, Katy Perry extended the offer of being a mentor figure for Olivia. In an interview for the Rolling Stones, Katy said, "The first time I met her, I put my hands on her shoulders and was like, listen, I'm here, whatever you need, because I know exactly what these pop girlies are going through. And when I was growing up, no one really did that for me." For some context, Katy Perry knew how challenging making a sophomore album could be when the debut album is such a huge success. You know, she's had that with One of the Boys and then having to follow that up with Teenage Dreams. She also said in an interview, you have your whole life to make your first record and then maybe 2 years to make your second, while going through real psychological change as well, which I think is really, really interesting because, you know, it's very true what she says. I think a lot of people don't really think about their debut albums because they don't expect the success per se. And then when you do have a smash hit album like Olivia did and like Katy Perry did, the sophomore album then becomes a lot more pressurizing because all of a sudden people are expecting music from you and they're expecting it to be as good as the first one. So, you know, Olivia Rodrigo certainly faced the same level of pressure and expectations when making Guts that Katy Perry had. So that's kind of where the mentorship came in. I don't think Katy actually was Olivia's mentor, but, you know, she extended that offer. Enough of the Perry and Rodrigo crossover, however. I'm going to take you back to 1984 in California, where Katy Perry didn't exist, but instead in her place, we had Katheryn Hudson. The Hudson household was one defined by Christianity. Both of Katheryn's parents were pastors and reportedly turned to religion after a wild youth. Not really sure what that entails, but I'm intrigued anyway. Because of this, Katheryn grew up listening to a lot of gospel music and only really discovered pop music through sneaking in CDs that her friends had got her into the house. One of the first pop songs she ever heard, this doesn't sound good in a British accent, so we're just going to, you know, put a little American spin on it, but You Oughta Know, okay, by Alanis Morissette, who I'll mention in a bit later because she's a very, very, very influential character on Katy Perry's career and sound. And a nice little link I would love to sneak in here too is that Olivia Rodrigo and Alanis Morissette did a joint interview together for the Rolling Stones for their little feature called Musicians on Musicians. So that's just like a nice little additional bit of information for you. At the age of 9, Katheryn Hudson started singing lessons and joined her church choir, and she was in this choir right up until the age of 17 when she moved to LA. Big moves for Katheryn. Before this move, she was first noticed for her singing by rock artists Steve Thomas and Jennifer Kapp, who took her to Nashville to improve her writing skills. And in 2001, still only 17 years old. I mean, I didn't realise going into this how young Katy Perry was when she started her musical career, but 17 years old. And she's moved out of home and gone to LA and gone to Nashville to improve her songwriting skills. Really, really impressive. So in 2001, still 17, she released her debut album titled Katy Hudson, which no one's really going to know about or would have even heard of because it's a contemporary Christian record under her, birth name. But this Christian influence was soon chucked out the window because Katy Perry transitioned into making secular music when she started working with producer Glenn Ballard, who, here we go, guys, lo and behold, worked with Alanis Morissette. As I said, this woman had a very big influence on who Katy worked with. Working with Glenn saw her move to LA and become Katy Perry, changing her name to avoid any confusion with Hollywood actress Kate Hudson, which is really hilarious because I think nowadays people wouldn't really even necessarily think of that. Like, I think even if Katheryn Hudson had stayed as Katy Hudson or Katheryn Hudson, I don't think there would necessarily be confusion with the Kate Hudson, but I guess that's kind of where the label was at the time, and maybe that's also in context of like Kate Hudson's career. But despite this seeming success with moving to LA and working with Glenn Ballard, Katy's time in LA was nothing short of frustrating. In 2004, now 20 years old, Katy signed to Ballard's label Java Records. But the album she was set to release in 2005 was shelved. I shouldn't laugh, but was shelved after Java Records was dropped. Ballard then introduced Perry to the huge label Columbia Records, and Perry worked again on another album titled Fingerprints that was set to come out in 2007. However, this record was also shelved when Columbia Records dropped her in 2006. So after moving to LA in 2001, she writes 2 albums, both of which get shelved because she joins 2 record labels, both of which get shelved. I mean, terrible luck. The frustration, I think I would actually cry and give up there. However, Katy Perry perseveres, and it's a very good thing that she does because in 2007, she signed to another label called Capitol Records and worked with a huge producer in the industry at the time called Dr. Luke. This man, we could do a whole episode on him because he's a nasty piece of work, but we won't get into his character at the moment. We'll just focus on him as a producer and as Katy Perry's collaborator. So she works with Dr. Luke to co-write her first single, I Kissed a Girl. Funny. It's almost like that song was a smash hit. This song was released, I Kissed a Girl was released in April 2008 and went straight to number 1 on the US Billboard Hot 100, clearly showing that, Katy Perry's persistence and resistance, if we will, has truly paid off. 2 months later, her debut album, One of the Boys, was released and had huge success, charting at number 9 on the US Billboard 200. Following this, she also won Best New Act at the MTV Europe Awards and won International Female Solo Artist at the 2009 Brit Awards. It's not just the album, it's not just the singles, it's the international recognition which she gets, which is phenomenal. She also gained attraction for her engagement to Russell Brand, another interesting character. Katy seems to surround herself with quite a couple interesting characters. Again, won't get onto Russell Brand and who he is, but it, to summarise, was a marriage which ended very quickly with them divorcing in 2012 due to Brand allegedly forcing Katy Perry to have kids before she was ready. So quite a nasty marriage, it sounds like. In 2010, Katy Perry released California Girls as the lead single from her sophomore album Teenage Dream. It, unsurprisingly, there's going to be a lot of stats in this part, but unsurprisingly debuted at number 1 on the charts, as did the album itself when it was released later on in 2010. And this is a stat I really want to focus on. She became the first artist to spend 69 consecutive weeks in the top 10 Billboard Hot 100 and became the first female artist to achieve 5 number 1 Billboard Hot 100 songs from one album. That's a really lengthy stat. And I don't think people are going to take that in. So I'm just going to say it again. She became the first female artist to achieve 5 number 1 Billboard Hot 100 songs from one album. To put it in perspective for you all, This is the second artist to do so behind Michael Jackson. That's mad. I had absolutely no idea Katy Perry was that successful. I'm going to be so honest with you all. And, you know, I haven't actually written this stat down in front of me, but so, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she was something like in this kind of 20 teens period from like around 2010 to 2016 energy. She was the highest paid female musician in the world. And I want to say one of the top paid female celebrities, if not in the world, definitely in America. I mean, that's mental. Moving on to 2013 now, Perry's third album, Prism, dropped and landed at number one once again. But in 2014, things took a turn. And Katy Perry found herself getting wrapped up in her first scandal because she got caught up in a plagiarism accusation by American rapper Flame, also known as Marcus Gray. The rapper accused Katy Perry of plagiarizing his song Joyful Noise with her song Dark Horse and was awarded a £2.1 million payout in 2019, which obviously Katy Perry then appealed because she was like, nah, we're not letting Flame and Marcus Gray just get this. And I mean, it worked out for Katy because a judge later overturned the verdict saying, this is actually really hilarious, saying Marcus Gray's melody wasn't particularly unique or rare, and Gray had been attempting to claim an improper monopoly. In other words, his song couldn't be plagiarized. The judges literally decided that his song couldn't be plagiarized because to do so would deprive artists of basic music building blocks. Because what he was calling out on being plagiarized was, I think it was like this 8-note riff kind of vibe, or like, I'm not very musical, so I don't know, but it was something so basic that multiple artists would use it in multiple songs. So basically, there's nothing unique about what Flame is plagiarizing. So that's kind of hilarious. And Katy Perry won. So woo, go Katy Perry. But I mean, it lasted from 2014 to like really recently, like 2019, 2022 vibes. Very, very long. But the drama in Katy Perry's life doesn't end there. In fact, it actually gets a whole load worse. For her feud with Taylor Swift bubbles and boils and becomes something very toxic and very grim, to be honest. Towards the end of 2013, Lockhart Brownlee, a dancer who had previously worked with Katy Perry on her tour California Dreams, revealed in an interview that he and two other dancers had left Taylor Swift's Red Tour after Katy had asked them to join her for her Prismatic World Tour in, you know, promoting her third album, Prism. In other words, Katy essentially stole Taylor Swift's backup dancers. And this blew up, my friends. This blew up. It was also the age of crazy Twitter storms and like Twitter feuds. And this blew up. Taylor responded nearly a whole year later, actually, but nevertheless responded in an interview with the Rolling Stones, where she was explaining the meaning behind her song Bad Blood, which featured on her upcoming album 1989. When talking about the song, she said that it was about a female celebrity who basically tried to sabotage an entire arena and tried to hire a bunch of people out from under me. This was not received well by fellow Katy Perry, who tweeted afterwards, after this interview came out, "Watch out for the Regina George in sheep's clothing." I mean, I think that stings a little bit. It's a little bit salty. It's a little bit Mean Girls. It's, you know, she's not accepting accountability here. She's not holding her hands up and being like, okay, yeah, I did steal your backup dancers. She's just making the whole thing feel very snaky. And things didn't stop with that tweet. Katy Perry went on to make a diss track, lol. She went on to make a diss track in 2017 aimed at Taylor Swift, titled Swish Swish, which was kind of like a song that was a bit of a joke at the time anyway, because the music video, she was trying to, you know, hop on the trends at the time, but she was at that awkward age where it's like, oh, you're just not down with the kids, like it's just not really working. So anyway, she makes this diss track Swish Swish, which also features Nicki Minaj, who had also been feuding Taylor as well, over this kind of 2015 MTV Video Music Awards. Basically, Nicki believed that Taylor's music video for Bad Blood stole the nomination for Nicki's own song, and music video Anaconda. So there was a bit of beef there. So the fact that Nicki Minaj hopped on this song with Katy Perry kind of reinforced the fact that it was a diss track for Taylor, or towards Taylor, if you will. Over 2017, Taylor remains very quiet on the whole topic, whereas Katy is a lot more outspoken. She goes from saying it's up to Taylor to fix to saying that she forgives Taylor and is sorry for anything she's ever done. In 2018, the feud essentially ends with Katy quite literally sending Taylor an olive branch. I mean, to be honest, from an outside perspective, this whole feud just seemed very one-sided. It seemed like Taylor had kind of blown what Katy did well out of proportion. I mean, Taylor did say, you know, trying to hire my backup dancers out from under me essentially was trying to sabotage and ruin my tour, which I completely understand and can see, but I'm also a bit like, well, at the end of the day, they were dancers that preferred, I mean, this is what the dancer Lockhart Brownlee said in an interview. He said, you know, we preferred dancing for Katy. We had a more enjoyable time at Katy. And Katy was like our family, was like family to us. So it just made sense to do that move. So I don't really know. I feel, and the fact that Katy was the one constantly having to apologise and constantly having to make things up to Taylor kind of just makes this, to me, just makes it feel like Taylor made the whole thing a lot more dramatic than it needed to be. But anyway, Katy Perry sends this olive branch to Taylor, and then, you know, she later features in Taylor's music video for You Need to Calm Down, and they're basically best friends again. It's just how the drama of backup dancers lasted from 2013 to 2018 is completely beyond me. The whole thing just seems very immature, if that's fair to say. But also I think I also have to remind myself of the context of the industry at the time. I think the industry now is very, very different. I think back then in the kind of 20-teens, especially pop female artists, they were really plotted against each other, and there was a huge competition between them too. Like it kind of felt like pop artists couldn't exist alongside each other, but it was all about who was the current artist of the time and who was the most successful one at the time. And I think there was a lot of bitterness back then, and now it's much more in a place of everyone supporting everyone. Like, you think now of like Chapel Roan, Sabrina Carpenter and Charlie all having their girly pop summers, if you will, and all of them are completely their own artists in their own ways. Like, none of it feels like they're stepping on each other's toes. So I think that's really, really nice. But yeah, this whole drama just seems absolutely beyond me. Anyway, back to Katy Perry and her music. In 2017, she branched out for her new album Witness and left her longtime producer and collaborator Dr. Luke behind her. But the branching out hasn't necessarily been the best move for her, because it was the first album she made that landed some very mixed reviews. An opinion that stayed with her for her 2020 album Smile. What I did find really fascinating with Witness, though, is that her lead single for the album, Chained to the Rhythm, broke Spotify's record for daily streams for a single by a female artist, racking up 3 million views on its debut day. But when you compare it to the current holders of the record, which is ironically Taylor Swift and Post Malone's Fortnite from Taylor's latest album, The Tortured Poets Department, their daily streams totaled at 25 million streams. So, you know, when you compare this to Katy's 3 million, it feels like hardly anything at all. But I mean, that's something else that's changed so much within music, and the industry is like streaming, and that's become such a massive thing now. To think that Katy Perry's single in 2017 held the record for 3 million streams compared to 2024 with Taylor Swift and Post Malone's 25 million. It's just like not even comparable how much streaming's changed. Like, it's become so consumed by people now. I think music gets, I mean, it's even happened with me recently. Like, I've been finding it really hard to enjoy music because I just binged it and I listened to anything and everything all the time because it's so accessible that number one, I forgot what quality music sounded like, and number two, I forgot the value of music because I didn't ever really have a break from it. But that's besides the point. To kind of wrap this episode up, and focus on where Katy Perry is now, I'm going to take you to her musical flop and latest album, 143. 143 is the lowest rated album on Metacritic in 13 years. And the album has also been absolutely slated by critics as well as the public online. The main issue I had and many others had with the album was its poor lyricism. The lead single for the album, Woman's World, just had the most basic and boring lyrics I've ever heard in my life. Okay, no hate to Katy Perry. It's just, we'll get onto the context again in a minute, but some of the lyrics, for example, go like this. Sexy, confident, so intelligent, she is heaven sent. I mean, there's just nothing really poetic about them. There's nothing really artistic about them at all. And with this song in particular, I mean, I didn't actually really mind that because Call Me Crazy, but I genuinely thought the song was good. Like, I was tapping my foot and nodding my head. I was having a good time. Like, the song's a bop. I really, really did enjoy the song. So the bad lyrics didn't bother me, but when I listened to the rest of the album and I realised this poor lyricism kind of was a constant theme, that's when it bothered me. Because I was like, you've made a whole record of an album and I don't really know what I've learned from Katy Perry. I don't really know who Katy Perry is and I don't know what I've learned from her as a person through listening to the album. There was nothing really insightful, I guess, about it, or there was nothing really introspective about it. It was all just very basic and very boring, to be honest. And I think it's important to bring up here that she kind of responded to all the hate online. So, you know, when people calling her out for the bad lyrics for Women's World, she was saying that it was satire and that was a bit of humour. But because this issue with the lyrics persisted throughout the whole album, that humour got lost on me. I could no longer enjoy it because I was like, but it's, you know, you can have one or two songs that are like that and have that humour and have that I guess satire, but you know, when the whole album is like that, I'm like, it's clearly not satire, it's just how you've written the album. Because if the whole album's humorous and if the whole album's meant to kind of be taking the piss, to be honest, it kind of loses its effect. Something I found really, really interesting though, I was talking to my friend about this album and also talking about Woman's World with her, and she actually said that she felt like Woman's World was a Barbie song and a Barbie audition, which ever since she said that, I couldn't not think about it. I listened to the song and was like, God, it's so Barbie. You know, if you don't know, for the Barbie soundtrack, a bunch of artists had to audition to be on the soundtrack. They were asked by the directors to make a Barbie song, and then they sent their songs in. Some got picked, some didn't. And my friend was like, I feel like Woman's World was made for Barbie and it just didn't get picked. So she, you know, she's kept it on the album. And it's really funny that when I listened to it, because I was like, it does sound exactly like a Barbie song. And I think that's why I was able to enjoy it, because it just felt a bit fun, a bit frivolous, quite lighthearted. Like, again, I didn't mind the lyrics because it was just a very good pop banger, to be honest. But the point I found really interesting, which Annie Mac made on her and Nick Grimshaw's podcast Sidetracked. It's a fantastic podcast, by the way. If you want weekly updates on music, check it out. But she said when she listened to the album that it wasn't actually as bad as she thought. You know, considering it got so much hate online, she was like, you know, it's not a bad record. Like, I listened to it and it's not trash. It's just made for the wrong time. It just feels like a dinosaur. And I feel like that really sums it up. And what kind of taps into that is the fact that for this album, Katy went back to her longtime producer and collaborator, Dr. Luke, who she made her first 3 albums with. You know, she went back to Dr. Luke, who'd made her successful and who she'd had success with. And perhaps that's why this record feels so old, and perhaps that's why this record feels, as Annie said, like a dinosaur. Because, you know, if she put this record out in 2016, it probably would have done quite well. It probably would have charted, maybe at least in the top 10. You know, I don't think people would have been mad about it. But I think now the pop music industry and genre has moved very dramatically, or at least has become much more experimental, much more interesting and innovative. When you look at the summer we've had Charli XCX, someone who writes incredibly honest, incredibly raw, incredibly reflective and perceptive lyrics. We've had Sabrina Carpenter, who loves a bit of like tongue-in-cheek, very cheeky, writes great one-liners and hooks. I mean, again, she does have a fantastic writing team behind her. Shout out Amy Allen, songwriter, great lyricist. But, and even like on Sabrina's record, she kind of dived into country a little bit. She, had her classic ballads, then she had her pop bangers. Like, there was a lot of variation. You look at Chapel Roan, who's really giving a voice to queer music, and even in terms of performance is very camp and very over the top, and her lyrics as well are very detailed and poetic. And sometimes actually, like, despite the fact that Chapel songs are quite upbeat, the lyrics are really harrowing. But with Katy, you don't get that. If you just read Katy's album on paper, if you just search up the lyrics on Google, you're not gonna spend time reading it because there's not really much to read. It's kind of a regurgitation of the same words and same lyrics repeated over and over, and those lyrics are very basic and almost kind of monosyllabic. So, if we were in 2016 and in Ibiza, maybe 143 would be having a great time. But I think being in 2024, especially when pop as the genre has shifted so much, it's just flopped. It's just flopped. It hasn't resonated with people. And I think that's the thing. People can't connect to it because there's nothing to connect to. Another point I loved, which Annie made, was her saying that this record just didn't feel believable. It didn't feel true and it didn't feel honest. And I think that's because there were no lyrics for us to try and believe in. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but it didn't feel true and it didn't feel honest because there was nothing exposing or vulnerable about this record. And I think, especially with our generation, what people really connect to in songs is that vulnerability. A lot of people connect to music because it makes them feel like that they're being seen, and makes it feel like artists are saying stuff and putting things into words that you can't quite express yourself. So when you have Katy Perry saying sexy, confident, she is heaven sent, it's people aren't resonating and people aren't connecting, and therefore people are like, what is this? Like, it just goes through one ear and out the other. So, I think the question we're all going to be asking ourselves now is, what's Katy Perry going to do now? Will she be able to bounce back from 143 and from all this hate? Or will she suffer? Because we know that her working with different producers hasn't necessarily worked. Look at Witness, look at Smile, both albums which received quite a lot of criticism. But she's also been hit with the revelation that going back to working with Dr. Luke also doesn't work. So, yeah, I think what will Katy Perry do seems to really be the concluding question of all of this. Anyway, that's all I really have time for. I don't really know if there's much more to say about Katy Perry, other than I'm just really fascinated to see what she does next, to be honest. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to keep up to date with all things Six Notes of Separation, please do give us a follow at Six Notes Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. I'll be back very, very shortly with another episode on another artist where we'll be exploring the link between them and Katy Perry.